Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're digging into something that, well, it definitely raises some eyebrows in the crypto space, the Pi network.
Yeah, specifically, we're looking at some core ideas from a recent source. It's a YouTube video, Channel Al Sunle, and it shares insights they attribute to someone called Dimas Nue.
Right. And we want to unpack two main concepts from that material, this thing called the merit system and also dual value.
Exactly. Our goal here is really to get a handle on what this source says these ideas mean for Pi, and maybe why understanding them could shift how you, the listener, view the whole project.
Okay, let's jump straight in then. Dual value sounds different for crypto.
Yeah.
What's the core idea here, according to this source?
So the claim is basically that Pi isn't meant to have just one single value, the one you see fluctuating on external markets.
Uh-huh.
According to this perspective, and they stress it's based on existing data, not just wishful thinking. Pi has two, distinct kinds of value.
Two kinds. Okay, what are they?
One value that exists inside the Pi ecosystem itself, tied to its internal use and structure.
Okay, and the other?
And then there's a separate value that, you might see on external exchanges.
Ecosystem value versus exchange value, that's quite a big difference.
It is. And the source is saying this isn't just an opinion piece, it's supposedly built into the network's design.
Right, baked into the fundamentals, not just tacked on later.
That's the assertion, that this dual nature is inherent.
Got it. Now, linked to this, you mentioned the merit system. The source calls this foundational, even says it's in the white paper.
That's right. They really emphasize this. The merit system, kan leye in Arabic, is presented as, a kind of social structure within Pi.
A social structure? How so?
Its main principle is that rewards, opportunities, even the value we just talked about, are meant to be based on what individuals actually do, their capabilities, achievements, contributions.
Okay, contributions.
Nice.
What kind of things count as contributions here? What earns you this merit?
It seems to be about active participation. So things like your daily mining activity, clicking the button, maybe engaging with apps, helping secure the network, things you actively do within Pi.
And importantly, what does this system not prioritize? What's explicitly pushed aside?
Yeah, this is key to their explanation. The merit system, as they describe it, deliberately ignores external factors. Like how much money you have in the bank, your real-world social status, who you know. None of that is supposed to matter for your standing or rewards within Pi.
Ah, okay. So it's an attempt at a level playing field purely based on network actions.
That's the idea presented.
And how does that connect to distributing new Pi coins?
Well, according to the source, that's precisely why Pi uses its particular method instead of, say, massive mining farms. The merit system is framed as the way they ensure the contributors get a fair share.
Fair share based on
their individual verifiable contributions,
Yeah.
your daily check-ins, your engagement. It's meant to be proportional to that effort, not how much computing power or cash you threw at it.
This really leads into a very powerful example the source uses to show the gap between exchange wealth and this merit value. They use a whale scenario.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast they paint.
Yeah.
Imagine someone, with deep pockets. They go into an exchange and buy, say, 300 million Pi.
Wow, okay.
Let's say they buy it at $1 per Pi, just as an example number used in the source. So that's $300 million worth of Pi based on that market price.
Right. Traditionally, that person's loaded, hugely wealthy in Pi terms.
Exactly. But here's the kicker, according to the source. Despite holding $300 million worth of Pi from the exchange,
Yeah.
their actual standing within the Pi network's merit system, what they call merit-based privileges, might only equate to something tiny in comparison. The number used is 955 a Pi.
Wait, hold on. 300 million versus just 955. That's almost nothing. How do they justify that huge difference? What does the 955 represent?
So the source is really specific here. That 955 Pi figure is only linked to Pi that this hypothetical person might have earned through actual contribution.
The things you mentioned before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Daily mining, completing their KYC, migrating those earned coins to the mainnet. It represents the value derived from participating in the network as intended, not just buying tokens on an open market.
Wow. Okay, that example really hammers home the distinction they're drawing. External wealth versus internal contribution value.
Completely different measures of worth in this view.
So if the internal system doesn't really value that external exchange wealth in the same way, why? Why list Pi on exchanges in the first place? What was the point, according to this source?
Well, the stated purpose was apparently quite narrow. primarily just to introduce Pi to the wider world, get the name out there,
And?
and crucially, to generate some initial liquidity, some basic trading volume to get things started for the ecosystem.
So the goal wasn't for pioneers to rush out and stack up as much pie as possible for trading profits.
The source is very explicit about this. They say that was definitely not the intention. It wasn't about creating a speculative frenzy on exchanges.
Interesting. The source also touches on whether the exchange price could eventually hit some kind of global value. They use terms like hubi or pod. Do you think that's likely soon?
They say it's possible,
Mm-hmm.
but it would take a very, very long time.
Okay, not a quick jump then. What would need to happen for that, based on their analysis?
Really extreme conditions. You'd need absolute massive buying volume on exchanges.
Huge demand.
Right. And almost nobody selling. Plus, and this is critical, that the Pi core team would have to completely stop injecting any more Pi onto those exchanges.
Ah, okay. And that leads to something really interesting, maybe even controversial, that the source claims about the core team's actions.
Yes. The source claims the core team intentionally steps in to, well, break the price momentum on exchanges
Intentionally.
by continuing to inject Pi onto them, adding supply.
They add supply to stop the price from just rocketing upwards. That sounds completely backwards from a typical market perspective. Why do that?
Well, the reason given isn't malicious, according to the source. It's presented as active management. They claim it's done to keep the price within a certain range, perhaps,
And why keep it in a range?
to generate the necessary liquidity that the internal Pi ecosystem needs to function and develop. It's framed as a strategy for the health of the main network, not for maximizing the external market price.
So how does this source position exchanges within the whole pie picture then? Are they central?
Not at all. They're described almost as like an external system, a partner maybe, but their role is primarily just that initial liquidity generation.
For the real ecosystem inside Pi.
Exactly. That's the perspective given.
And the big picture message seems to be, Pi Network is definitely not designed for people whose main goal is making long-term profits just by trading on external exchanges.
Precisely. The source suggests any quick profits people make there might be from pioneers selling off their coins, maybe because they haven't quite grasped this longer-term internal ecosystem vision that's being described.
Right, maybe selling what the source would consider the merit-based Pi without understanding its supposed internal value.
Something like that, yeah.
Now, to make this dual value thing a bit clearer, the source apparently showed an image, like a mock-up of a wallet. What did that illustrate?
Yeah, it was presented as a visual aid to show how this split might look to an actual user down the line.
What did it show?
Basically, two separate balances in the wallet. One might have, say, a green badge. The source labels it Jivalite, and that represents your merit-based Pi, the stuff you earned through contributions. Maybe it shows 2,000 Pi there.
Okay, your earned balance.
Right. And then another balance showing Pi that might have come from elsewhere, like an exchange. Maybe that shows, say, 246 Pi, and of course a total.
So it's a way to visually separate your internally generated value from externally acquired tokens, potentially once some kind of consensus price is active.
That's the idea they're illustrating, yes. A visual representation of dual value in practice. They do add a disclaimer, though, that it's just an illustration to explain the concept. The actual look, the names, the layout, that could all change if and when the open mainnet launches.
Makes sense, but it definitely helps picture the separation. Okay, let's broaden it out slightly. What other insights or advice does the source offer?
Well, one interesting point is they position Pi Network as something that complements Bitcoin rather than trying to replace it or directly compete.
Cooperative rather than adversarial.
Seems to be the angle. And there's some pretty direct advice given to pioneers, to people involved in Pi.
What's the main message?
It's quite blunt. Don't just follow the herd. They really urge people to change your way of thinking.
Wow.
By actually reading and understanding the project's foundational documents, the white paper, and significantly, they mention digging into the source code itself. It's a call to be informed, not just fellow hype.
So being wise or smart, as they put it, means doing your homework on the fundamentals.
That's exactly it. And they circle back to exchanges here, too.
What about them?
Saying again that exchanges aren't the place for, their words, greedy pioneers. The advice is to be smart by understanding the network's real purpose, not just chasing exchange pumps.
And how is this internal consensus value, the merit-based one, actually activated or maintained in the network?
The source points to the nodes and supernodes.
Yeah.
They're presented as the crucial infrastructure for activating and enforcing that internal value system.
The technical backbone.
Yeah, the mechanism that validates transactions and maintains the integrity of that merit-based ledger, so to speak. And here's a really critical claim they make. All of this stuff we've discussed, the dual value, the merit system, the distribution rules, even that controversial price management.
Yeah.
The source states it's all supposedly programmed directly into Pi's smart contracts. They specifically mention something called the Pi Smart TX code.
Whoa. So it's not just a philosophy or a set of guidelines. They're claiming it's actually coded into the network's automated rules.
That's the strong assertion made in the source material, yes. That these principles are meant to be enforced by the code itself, making them less reliant on, say, just trusting the core team's ongoing decisions.
Okay. Let's bring this all back to you, the listener. Why should understanding these specific ideas, dual value, merit system over wealth, the controlled exchange strategy, why should this matter to you?
Well, if you're involved with Pi in any way, mining it, holding it, even just watching it, this perspective, if accurate, gives you a potential framework.
A framework for what?
For understanding why the project might be making certain decisions, why they emphasize certain user actions, or, crucially, why the price on external exchanges might not be the be-all and end-all for the core team or long-term believers, according to the source. It offers a different lens.
It definitely presents a vision very different from many crypto projects that seem laser-focused on market cap and exchange listings above all else.
Absolutely. It kind of forces you to question, or at least consider, alternative ways of defining value within a digital community or network.
Right. So wrapping up this deep dive then, we've explored this source's perspective on Pi having a deliberate dual value, that internal contribution-based value versus the external exchange value.
We looked at how central the merit system is presented to be, prioritizing what you do within the network over external factors like wealth.
And we touched on the specific kind of controlled role exchanges are claimed to have mostly for initial liquidity, with the price supposedly managed by the core team.
All of it presented as being fundamentally programmed into the network's code, a system where, arguably, internal merit could trump external market signals.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. Considering this model presented by the source, a crypto project potentially designed with its own internal value system, deliberately managed somewhat independently from or even against pure market forces and traditional wealth, how does that challenge or maybe redefine your ideas about value in this digital world?
Yeah, and what questions does this raise for you about how other decentralized projects, maybe future ones, might think about distributing worth and rewarding participation?